You are watching India Global on NDTV. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. We've got an action-packed bulletin lined up for you. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking. Joe Biden's son, Hunter, faces a second federal indictment, this time on tax evasion. The 56-page charge sheet accuses him of evading $1.4 million in taxes from the year 2016 to the year 2019 and funding an extravagant lifestyle. Qatar grants India consular access to 8 Navy veterans. The Indian envoy meets 8 Navy veterans a day after the Prime Minister had met the Qatari Emir on the sidelines of the COP28 summit in Dubai. The United Nations Climate Conference began its final week with negotiations. The COP28 President Sultan Al Jaber urged countries to get out of their comfort zones and work together to reach agreement before this 2-week summit ends. Negotiators will now work to finalize a key document called the Global Stocktake. And as part of a burst of meetings focused on the Middle East, Russia's President Vladimir Putin greeted the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi in the Kremlin a day after visiting the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, where he discussed the wars in Gaza and Ukraine and efforts by Russia and OPEC to boost oil prices. Putin, meanwhile, praised Narendra Modi, stating that the Indian Prime Minister takes a tough stance in protecting national interests. Putin said Prime Minister Modi could not be intimidated or forced by external pressure. Elon Musk has said Disney boss should be fired immediately after the company stopped advertising on his platform X. Some firms, by the way, have paused advertising on X amid concerns over anti-Semitism. A big focus, there is hope for the 7 ex-Indian Navy officers and 1 sailor who are on death row in Qatar. Now, on charges of espionage, these charges that have been completely denied by the Indian government, the External Affairs Ministry has now said that the Prime Minister met the Emir of Qatar on the sidelines of the climate change summit in Dubai recently, where the two leaders had a good discussion on the overall bilateral relationship, which included a conversation of the well-being of the Indian community, which presumably would include the Navy men as well. The allegations against them have come as a shocker, with no real clarity on why they were charged. Hearings on their appeals have now taken place, and the Indian ambassador has met them on the 3rd of December as well.
Prime Minister met the Emir of Qatar in Dubai on the sidelines of COP28. I think he put out a tweet. My understanding is that there are good conversation on the overall bilateral relationship as well as on the well-being of the Indian community, as he said. There have been 2 hearings. As you know, we filed an appeal, as is from the families, and the detainees had filed an appeal. 2 hearings have since been held. Meanwhile, our ambassador got consular access to meet all 8 of in prison on 3rd of December. And as I said, this is a sensitive issue, but we will continue to follow, and whatever we can share, we will do so.
Right, on the show today, we look at whether there's finally hope for the families of the ex-Navy officers and sailor. Joining us on India Global this week, former Indian ambassador to Kuwait, Prabhu Dayal, and Captain DK Sharma, former spokesperson of the Indian Navy. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on India Global. Ambassador Dayal, to you first. Now, although next to nothing has been made public in this regard, do you believe there's a genuine sense of hope now, especially after Narendra Modi met with the Qatari Emir? We are aware that in the Gulf sector, the power of the ruler is very important.
I am extremely optimistic after our Prime Minister's meeting with the Qatari Emir in Dubai just a few days ago. I've seen the visuals of that meeting on television, and there was great warmth between the 2 leaders. I can see it now in the picture that you are showing. Now, a lot of these decisions depend on what the Emir thinks, because in the Gulf Sheikdoms, the power of the ruler is very, very important. So, first of all, I think that the initiative taken by the Prime Minister to meet the Qatari Emir and, of course, discuss the welfare of the Indian community, those discussions must surely have included this issue of the arrest of the 8 naval officers, although nothing has been made public in this regard. But knowing how our Prime Minister works, he must have taken it on himself to discuss this issue with the Qatari Emir. And this is what gives me hope. The personal initiative and the interest which the Prime Minister takes. As it is, things have started changing in the recent months. These officers were in detention since August 2022. There was nothing known about why they were arrested. Some disclosures have been made confidentially to our government in this regard, and there has been consular access given. Earlier, they were kept in solitary detention. Now, consular access was given to the representatives of our embassy. And following the Prime Minister's meeting, the ambassador has been given personal access, consular access to these detainees. So I have reason to be hopeful. And my hope, as I said earlier, comes out of Prime Minister's meeting with the Qatari Emir.
Right. Let's also bring in Captain DK Sharma. Captain, I think you'd agree with me when I say it's been a harrowing year for the former Navy personnel. But do you think these small steps will lead to a positive outcome? I mean, end of the day, the highest office in the country is directly dealing with the case.
You're very right. It's been a harrowing time for them for the last 1.5 years now, out of which 2 daughters were married without their father being present. What the worst can happen? I mean, say the parents, the fathers, the families looking forward. They were supposed to join. They were, we were told tomorrow, day after. So it is all, I think, small steps are leading towards a good news, which is likely to come. And we know it all that the highest office in the country is directly, dealing with the case. So the families have got this assurance that the highest office is looking into it. You have to just hold your horses, remain patient. You have been patient for the last 18 months, and it's only a matter of time.
Right. Ambassador Dayal, we have enjoyed a great strategic relationship with Qatar. So this case, in a sense, was a sort of blot. But what's your assessment now? What's the way forward?
It's a sensitive matter. There is a judicial aspect. There is the matter now before the Court of Appeal. If it's rejected, it can still go up to the Court of Cassation. But knowing the overall atmospherics and knowing how things work in these Gulf Arab countries, the sheikdoms, if the sheikh or the emir is well disposed, it makes a huge difference.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. We sincerely hope that the families do receive some positive outcomes in the near future. Thank you so much for joining us on India Global. The UK government has introduced measures it promised would deliver the biggest ever cut in net migration after levels soared to a record high. Now, Rishi Sunak's government has unveiled a crackdown on record high net migration as he tries to wrest back control of his increasingly divided Conservative Party. Now, these measures, unveiled by Home Secretary James Cleverly, follow a series of polls which show the Tory leader's popularity has plummeted to a record low, and he's actually now faring even worse than Liz Truss with the electorate. So in a bid to win back voters, the UK Home Secretary has increased the salary threshold for foreign workers from £26,200 to £38,700 as part of a package set to come into force in April. So here's the UK's 5-point plan to cut legal migration as they set a new target of 3 lakh fewer migrants a year. Foreign care workers will no longer be able to bring their dependents to the UK. The minimum income for family visas has been raised to the new salary threshold of £38,700. The shortage occupation list will be overhauled to end a 20% salary discount. And the graduate visa, that route which lets students stay for about 2 years after their studies, that is currently under review. Now, firstly, legal net migration. It has shot up to record levels in the UK and it's currently 3 times what it was when the Conservatives won the last election and promised it would fall. Little wonder so many Tory MPs are actually desperate to see it come down. And secondly, illegal migration. Well, Rishi Sunak has promised to stop the boats and he has vowed to crack down on both legal and illegal migration. But experts warn that this model also risks causing further chaos in the already stretched health sector and damaging the UK's long-term growth prospect as well.
Each year, thousands of Indians make their way across to the UK, hoping to realize their dreams of a better life with great career opportunities. Enter the UK PM Rishi Sunak. The Asian origin leader recently announced a strict new immigration policy that would potentially deal a meaty blow to those dreams. Indian students are likely to be some of the most affected, as out of 4,86,107 study visas issued by the UK government in the 12 months till September this year, half were granted to Indian and Chinese students.
Of course, there have been changes recently announced for dependents as well, so you can no longer bring dependents on most when you're coming to the UK for most courses. There are some exemptions for postgraduate research courses. We understand that this is a bit of a harsh move, frankly. We are therefore taking that up with authorities as well to understand their concerns and to see what the best way forward is.
So what led to these drastic changes? After official figures showed that net migration to the UK hit a record 7,45,000 in 2022, ministers had come under pressure to act on legal migration. Sunak's party members had been asking to bring down the net migration numbers ever since the data was released last month. Describing current migration levels as far too high, Sunak wrote in The Sun, "If you can't contribute to the UK, you're not coming to the UK." UK Home Secretary James Cleverly has said that the measures are expected to cut down the number of people emigrating to the UK by 3 lakhs. Finding a job in the UK was already an uphill task for Indian students in the UK, owing to a combination of factors ranging from the post-pandemic economic slowdown to employers' unwillingness to sponsor visas. And with the latest government measures, that climb is becoming steeper by the day. With Vishal Vivek, Bureau Report, NDTV.
Let's switch tracks now. Well, in the aftermath of Hamas terrorist surprise attack on Israel on the 7th of October, college campuses in the United States have witnessed multiple incidents of anti-Semitism. In fact, Harvard University's president, along with the presidents of University of Pennsylvania and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, have come under fire after their recent testimony at Capitol Hill. Here are the details.
Ever since the Israel-Hamas conflict began on October 7th, protests have erupted in the US from both the sides. Many a time these protests have turned anti-Semitic or anti-Arab in nature. In the 2 weeks since the war began, there have been 312 reported anti-Semitic incidents in the US, according to a report by advocacy group Anti-Defamation League. These incidents include harassment, vandalism and assault. Meanwhile, the Council on American Islamic Relations has said that the US is experiencing an unprecedented increase in reported anti-Arab and anti-Muslim bias incidents. Many times these anti-Semitic and Islamophobic incidents have occurred at prestigious US institutions such as Harvard and MIT, with the US Education Department launching a probe into the matter in November.
36 hours ago, I, along with most of campus, sought refuge in our rooms, as classmates and professors chanted proudly for the genocide of Jews while igniting smoke bombs and defacing school property.
A House committee hearing in relation to the matter was held on Tuesday with the leaders of Harvard University, the University of Pennsylvania and MIT. It was alleged during the hearing that the college presidents are not doing enough to protect students.
As a student of constitutional democracy, I know that we need both safety and...
This response from the University of Pennsylvania leader Liz Magill and a similar one from the Harvard president Drew Flack. Both the leaders later said that there is no space for anti-Semitism on their campuses.
MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
When the Education Department probe concludes, it will make recommendations to the colleges.
Yes
if they
or no?
don't comply, they risk
Calling for the
losing
genocide of
federal
Jews
funding.
does not constitute bullying and harassment?
The larger question is, has the Israel-Hamas war brought ideological fault lines to the surface? And how will this play out in institutions of higher learning? Vishal Vivek's report for NDTV.
In other news, the US indictment of an Indian national for an assassination plot against wanted Khalistani separatist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, allegedly directed by an Indian government official, is likely to be at the top of the agenda as the US Federal Bureau of Investigation Director Christopher Wray travels to India next week. Now, the Indian government has sought to distance this visit from the case, saying the FBI director's trip had been planned for some time. Here are the details.
For decades, the FBI has been working to keep Americans safe.
It is his first visit to India since he took charge as the chief of FBI. Christopher Wray will be in Delhi next week, close on the heels of US's allegations against an Indian official, accusing him of being involved in a conspiracy to kill Khalistani extremist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. This delegation, meanwhile, led by the US's junior national security advisor Jonathan Feiner, explored the possibility of a probe in line with the larger diplomatic agenda. In the first meeting between Indian and US officials, American investigators acknowledged New Delhi's establishment of an inquiry committee.
I think the United States and India have a complicated history. We have not always been wholly aligned. We have not always found it easy to work together as economic partners. We have not always found it easy to be on the same side of issues geopolitically. And I think in some ways the most important step forward for the United States and India is recognizing on each side that there is much more that connects us than that divides us. And that does not mean, by the way, that we will agree on everything. There are many difficult issues that remain in this relationship.
Now one of India's closest allies, the US has also urged New Delhi to cooperate with Canada on the investigation into the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Nijjar.
Certain inputs were given to us as part of our security cooperation with the United States. Those inputs were of concern to us because they related to the nexus of organized crime, trafficking, and other matters. So, because it has a bearing on our own national security, it was decided to institute an inquiry into the matter. Insofar as Canada is concerned, no specific evidence or inputs were provided to us.
When this alleged incident was brought to our attention, we made very clear at the most senior levels of our government, the most senior levels of the Indian government, how seriously we would treat something like this. They have opened an investigation into the matter.
The US has vowed an open and closely coordinated probe, a clear departure from Canada's approach of unsubstantiated claims. With Canada now on the back foot over the Khalistani terror issue, many extremist outfits continue to operate with impunity. With Pannu's latest dare of blowing up the Indian Parliament, India's zero-tolerance policy towards extremism in all its forms seems more legitimate than ever before. Vedant Agarwal for NDTV.
Let's switch tracks now. Well, negotiators at COP28 finished up their first week in a more familiar place for them, the murky middle where momentum and roadblocks intertwine. Now negotiations on how the world can slash greenhouse gas emissions and stave off the worst impacts of the climate crisis will reach a fresh intensity over the next few days, with nations wrangling over whether to phase out or phase down fossil fuels. The key draft text is to do with the global stocktake. This is a requirement of the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, a comprehensive assessment of the progress or lack of it towards the Paris goals of holding global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees Celsius, while also pursuing efforts to limit temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Within this text, the most contentious lines are over the potential phase out or phase down of fossil fuels. But as the text moves from the technical level overseen by civil servants to political negotiations involving mainly ministers, there is still little sense of what the landing ground of any compromise could be. Now it's up to global leaders to haggle over what the future should look like and whether there should be a commitment to phase out oil, coal and natural gas, as climate activists, many experts and some nations say, or something softer. Now, for further clarity on what to realistically expect, joining us, Linda Calhier, Executive Director of Strategic Perspectives. Linda, thanks so much for making time for us. You know, India managed to get an outcome at the G20 when no one was really expecting it. But how do you see India's climate leadership growing, especially as India has repeatedly projected itself as the voice of the global south?
Thanks so much for the question. We hear that here in Dubai as well. So really when you walk the corridors, India is recognized as the voice of the global south. I think it's been really impressive what they've done with the G20 summit, especially the task force of reform of the multilateral development banks was a very important signal to make sure that the new industrial area where clean technologies play an increasing role is accessible for all countries and it's becoming affordable for all countries.
So do you think it's realistic and possible then, Linda, for India to transition to a zero fossil fuel economy?
I think it is. It needs to do it at its own pace and with its own priorities, but especially if you look at the global markets for clean tech growing, the sense of direction is clear. The clean technologies are becoming cheaper in many countries already, and we hope that that becomes increasingly the case for other countries. And I think that's where the financial reform that I mentioned initially comes back in, because we need to ensure that the benefits that come with it, the jobs that are getting created and the cleaner air and the investment and innovation is really accessible for all countries.
Right, just picking up on the financial reform aspect, you know, COPs have been seeing a stalemate on the finance discussions. Developing countries cannot transition fast enough without financial support, as you are aware. Linda, are there any new mechanisms to mobilize finance which are coming in? And how can countries like India access them?
I think the work they've done with the G20 task force has been really powerful. We've seen also the Paris summit this year by President Macron and Mia Mottley, who really said we need to ensure that the finance is flowing. And I think there are mechanisms that are getting broader. So we can look into de-risking, we can look into the role of banks, we can look into how to bring in the private sector more. I know that Prime Minister Modi is also really talking about the trillions and shifting the private capital, which is not to substitute the public investment, of course, but just because it's the trillions that we need and they need to be mobilized faster. So, and I think India is very well positioned to really benefit from these mechanisms and also ensure that there's constant progress and we move beyond the rhetoric.
Right, thank you so much for joining us with your comprehensive insight, Linda, into the final week of negotiations taking place at the COP summit. Let's hope we witness positive, concrete outcomes in Dubai.
I hope so too. Thanks so much.
In other news, in the backdrop of COP28 in Dubai, the Russian president, he was on a Middle East diplomacy outreach. He hosted Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi in Moscow. And while Putin said it was important to discuss the Palestinian situation, Raisi termed it as more than a regional issue, one that involved all of mankind. In a rare overseas visit, President Putin touched down in Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, and Putin was seen greeting Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman before the two sat down for talks. But ahead of the meeting, the Kremlin had said that the two would discuss oil markets, as well as ways to promote de-escalation in the war in Gaza. But Putin's first port of calling was Abu Dhabi, the capital of the UAE. He was escorted to the presidential palace where he was greeted with a 21-gun salute, also a flyby of UAE military jets, trailing smoke in the colors of the Russian flag. Do remember, Putin has been positioning himself as a mediator for the Hamas-Israel war. Well, that's all on this episode of India Global. Thank you for investing your time and watching. Goodbye.